Hello everybody. I'm making a little video just to show off a project that I've been working on and off. This is an arcade style controller for Super Nintendo. If you look over here, this is a controller port for Super Nintendo and Famicom. So this is a hardware solution, not a software solution. This is not for PCs or emulation or anything like that. This is so you can run it on an actual Super Nintendo, or in this case the Super NT clone console. What I've got here is, instead of building a regular joystick-based arcade controller, I have made a Hitbox style controller. So what that does is it replaces the 4 directions and combinations thereof on a joystick with buttons. This makes it a little bit more precise for fighting games specifically, and it also adds a spacebar style big ass jump button right here. You might have seen my Mega Man and Kirby Hitbox style controller earlier on this channel. Same deal. The difference here is that I wanted to make an arcade controller that would work on the Super Nintendo for both fighting games and action games. So a big problem with making a fighting game controller layout is that it's kind of a pain to press this for up. Like, you can do it and you can eventually kind of get your brain to work with it, but in anything that uses like standard 8-way directions, it's a little confusing. It's much easier to just have a WASD style up button, which is what this is right here. To open this up, you can see here, this is a PCB out of like a $5 cheap knockoff Super Nintendo controller. Doesn't really matter as long as the inputs go through. Digital is digital, on is on, off is off. So the build quality of the controller itself doesn't really matter as long as the PCB has all the functions. Right now you can see the up button is not currently hooked up. I do have plans to change that. This is kind of a temporary layout. And over here is the start and select button, rather than where they're eventually going to be, which is over here on the side. So you can see, not the best drilling job. This is one of the first controllers that I've made, and I don't have a lot of experience with building stuff, so I actually came up with the layout, drilled the holes myself, and you can kind of see, not ideal, not perfectly spaced. This could use a little bit more curve to fit the fingers a little better, so consider this a prototype. You might also be wondering, what's the deal with these 2 buttons here? These are the L and R buttons. So in anything that uses kind of directionals, kind of like directional movement or tertiary functions, say like moving left and right through your inventory of weapons in Mega Man, or doing dashes or flips in a different game side to side, these are useful, especially since in any game that you need to hold down the L and R to perform different functions, it's kind of hard on a standard 6-button layout to hold down L and R over here and then push something here. It's like a little awkward. You can do it, but it's difficult. So I made these so you can kind of, do those together. Let's, just to prove that this thing works, let's play some Kirby right now. One awkward thing is that you can't fix kind of everything. This is jump, this is, suck up Kirby's powers. A lot of Super Nintendo games use this for jump. Use B for jump and Y for shoot. Or, run, in like the case of like a Super Mario World or something like that. So there you go. This is up right there, that's working. So the layout right now, A, B, I think this is Super Nintendo Y and X. No, sorry, it's the other way around, X and Y. And then this is start. This is select over here. So let's try some fighting games. So you can kind of see what I'm talking about in terms of the layout. We're going to going to go over here to the one player versus computer. We are going to actually pick the easy input mode. So what that does is it makes the R and L. Let me get a control here. So R and L here, you'd hold those. Light for light over here, strong for over here, and you press the face button to do specials. You push both of these buttons together. Does your super. And so instead we're going to be holding this one. We're going to be holding this one. Light, strong. You can hold it, light, press the face button. Shoots a special attack. Do the strong version over here. So this is kind of an ideal game for this layout, specifically because it is a 4-button one. You know, you get clean inputs. You can easily access this. Eventually, I am hoping to make these into the R and L button as well. So, oops, my bad. So you will be able to use these as R and L as well, and then obviously the buttons on the side here are going to be start and select. It's still comfortable layout as it stands right now. It just could be a little bit better. And then eventually this will also be a secondary up button, just so you can cover all the bases, right? Oops. I was gonna do that. Grabs are so powerful in this game. Oops. CPU is brutal in this game. Now let's show off something a little different. We're gonna play some Hagane. This strongly uses the R and L buttons to do different evasive moves. This game is kind of like almost like an early character action game. It's very complicated control scheme. You got different attacks here. You can switch here between your different weapons right here. Grenades, shurikens, sword, grappling hook with select and I think it's whatever the top button on the Super Nintendo is. Y? I don't know. Nintendo controller layout is weird. You can slide. You can do an explosive ninjutsu. You can, and most importantly, for our purposes, you can do some evasive flips depending on what direction you're in. Pressing it out of one jump does that. Pressing it out of two flips does that. You can also flip into a jump. Let's do that. Flip into a jump kick like this as well. So, you know, pretty cool. Works pretty well on this layout. Pressing R and L over here on like a 6-button layout, obviously a little troublesome since, you know, you kind of have to press like L to flip left and R over here to flip right. Alright, so let's go show off one more game. Let's stick with our ninja theme. The Ninja Warriors once again just came out. Let's return to the Ninja Warriors again. Great little action game. Simple controls, so not gonna be complicated for showing off this purposes, although I'll probably lose a lot because it's hard to talk and play at the same time. Eventually my goal is to replace the PCB of this thing with an 8-bit DOE PCB. What that will do is allow the enabled to use of these wireless adapters on basically anything that has a compatible adapter, as well as Switch and PC. So basically you'd be able to do like Super Nintendo, Genesis, fucking your phone, I guess, and PlayStation Classic, those Nintendo Mini things. My goal is to get this specifically usable for Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. Now the receiver will introduce some lag, but it's basically unnoticeable to me. As far as I've been using this like for a year or two at this point, the wireless receivers, I can't tell the difference. Obviously less ideal for if you're playing a fighting game. This is right here kind of the PCB that I will be using. I've already sort of hooked up a different one that I broke down, and it seems to be working, at least in theory. Again, I ran out of parts, so the thing's not complete, but the goal is, if you look at this controller, it's got an A, B, C, X, Y, Z, and then there are shoulder buttons here. So these shoulder buttons on a Genesis, they do Z and C, the last buttons, kind of on like a standard 6-button layout. For Super Nintendo, not that useful. What is more useful is if I used a Super Nintendo PCB as a base. The problem with this is that it will go A, B, and then C or something up here, and you know, X, Y, Z here. It's just an unideal layout once it gets translated to a 6-button, especially because the big problem is that there's an XYZ button on the on the Genesis, which doesn't get properly translated if you start with this PCB, because it's trying to do ABC and then it'll do XYZ, which is fine if you're using something like this, but it fucks up the arcade controller. Starting with one of these, it'll probably map, so you'll get L and R up here, which would be L and R up here, which is pretty standard translation of a, you know, 4-face button controller and shoulder buttons to a 6-button layout. But these up here get turned into, I believe, an L2 and R2, which if you use on a Super Nintendo, just translates to L and R. So that would enable the use of these 2 buttons and these 2 buttons as well as alternatives. And you know, I could just hook the buttons up twice if I really wanted to. There's nothing stopping me from like hooking every single button on this controller to up or whatever, or something like that, right? I could do that if I really, really wanted to. The big advantage is that on PC, on the Switch, having the L2 and R2 button is, you know, a big boon. So I could get, you know, all the functions of a standard controller, analog aside, and so I could say play Mega Man 11 specifically, have these extra function buttons right here for, you know, I don't know, slide or something, you know, jump, shoot, slide, special attack, since you can use special weapons and Mega Buster, I believe, in that game. And then you can have these for either the powered up states, the, you know, the new gear systems, or have them just switch weaponry. So, you know, that's a pretty cool function. Theoretically, it'll work, so I'll have to come with an update on how successful that actually is in practice at some point. Again, this process is pretty labor intensive and takes a lot of money. If you were saying, hey, this looks cool, should I build my own? No. If you need an arcade, first of all, if you need an arcade controller, you have some pretty good options. If you want a Hitbox controller, you can just buy those from the official Hitbox people, or you can build a decent one for, you know, you can get some cases and stuff now. There's actually quite a few options now, as far from custom case builders and stuff like that. Building The drilling and stuff is just a real pain, and obviously you can kind of fuck it up. And there's people who have way better resources who can build you a way nicer looking controller. And if you want to play Super Nintendo games, honestly, just use your arcade stick on a PC. Almost all of them have PC compatibility at this point, and if they don't, you can make them compatible in some way. This is really only useful for somebody like me who has very specific needs and wants their controller to do a very specific thing. It's mostly just a fun curiosity and fun project for me, even if it has been pretty stressful. But yeah, definitely not a beginner project. I did learn a lot in the process of building this thing, and it's kind of a cool thing to show up. But in terms of practicality, very little. There is very little practicality. But yeah, let me know what you think about this thing. If you've enjoyed it, if you would kind of like to see that update of, you know, the theoretical one-day update that will make this thing compatible with the Switch. Again, I might even replace this case. I'm not really totally satisfied with the job I did for it, even though I think it's, you know, good for an amateur in terms of that kind of stuff. Oops. Yeah, I might, you know, buy a custom case and then put the new PCB and stuff and buttons in there, and, you know, get kind of a custom controller layout built, since, you know, they're not going to exactly be selling this layout. But that's really long-term plans. That's something that's pretty expensive and that I don't have any plans on doing in the near future. But yeah, thanks for sticking around and watching this weird rambly thing that I built, and hopefully you at least found this interesting.